Just to begin with straight away, with his first documentary, way back in 1961, which was on Rabindranath Tagore, if we go through it, we see a very linear progression. However, it starts with his death and ends on a hopeful note. Would you say that that is his mark in this documentary? That is what his contribution is?
Yeah, because later when we even see his documentary on his father, there is a final montage which ends up most probably in childhood portrait of Rai. And even if you see behaving progress, it also ends in very positive note. So one can say a certain kind of pattern, energy of Ray, the way he portrays his mentors, his own father, the documentary on Rabindranath was a bit less personal than the other two, because the other two was a bit more personal in nature. And this documentary, which was made on the 100th birth anniversary of Rabindranath Tagore, it was more of a kind of commissioned work, one can say, but not necessarily impersonal, but relatively it was more of a commissioned work, more of a work which he was requested to do in that sense. But that progression, that of course it emerges like a pattern out of the three documentaries.
Well, in the documentary itself, we see him minutely tracing Tagore's life from one event to the other. But what we don't see is what he calls his heritage, that is the works of Tagore. He doesn't go much deep into the works itself, which is of course Tagore's legacy, so to say. Why do you think that is?
That's something I don't have the answer, but that's something which even kind of intrigues me as well. Because if we can recall that within few years he will adapt one of his best adaptations of Tagore's writings. And if you think of writing as such, then Charulata is full of shots of writing as such. But here, I think Ray was more inclined. I don't know if that was that was requested from him. That he was more inclined in portraying Rabindranath as a cultural public figure as such, as a figure who spearheaded certain kind of culture, who had strong agreements and disagreements regarding politics. He was a man who was almost a kind of educational entrepreneur, the way he set up Vishwavardi and so on and so forth. So yes, in the 100th birth anniversary of Tagore, Satyajit's documentary was more of a public persona than the creative man as such. And even if we check Andrew Robinson's biography of Tagore, there we see that Ray had certain hesitations regarding restaging scenes, though there are few shots with restages things, but Ray was not very sure that would he restage the act of writing, or like Ritupurna Ghosh did later, would he let someone enact Rabindranath in some certain kind of way. And it was less evocative, more a discursive kind of film. Right. So rather than going deep into his poetry and other things, it was more about the public person.
Yeah, so what you are saying is that Ray was contextualizing Tagore in his own time, which is very evident from the documentary. He even talks about the crisis of civilization and what Tagore's ideas were during the Second World War, and that some kind of ends. However, what it just touches upon is the internationalism which Tagore came to believe in the last years of his life. He almost doesn't address this. Would you say that is true? And if so, then why?
Yeah, in that sense, the film is not exhaustive. The film is not exhaustive. It doesn't touch each and every aspect of Tagore. Most probably because one can think of it like this, that this was the first documentary he was making though it was a documentary film of considerable duration, considerable length, so most probably a certain kind of filmmaking immaturity was there, that how to actually bring the entire thing into the whole. So it looks more like a documentary which not a kind of follower of Tagore is making, but more of how India or Bengal at that moment would like to remember Rabindranath. So therefore certain aspects just goes away.
Quite a few years later, I mean almost 15 years later, would shoot another personality, and which is Bala, which was released in 1976. Here, I'm reading this now because we were just discussing about his detachment from the figure somehow, unlike in the Inner Eye or Shukmare. Here we see Bala, Krishnamurti, behind the stage, so to say, acting out what she is in her own life, her day-long activities. So would you say that this is definitely a maturity on Ray's part after 15 years? And however, I mean, it's a related question. Although we see her acting it out, her life, we see only her daughter, whatever she's doing, practicing, eating. We hardly see the family, so to say, the father. So there are certain absences as well.
Yeah, there are certain absences because this film is different in more than one way than the other films which are based on personalities. Because as we understand that Rabindranath is certainly a kind of mentor who his own father was definitely. Really was someone whom he knew most intimately. He missed his father at a young age. He didn't see Rabindranath as such once, most probably during his childhood. And Vinod Bihari therefore was more of a father figure to him. But here, in case of Bala, something else is happening. Here he is acting more like a fan, because I recall him saying that he considered her the greatest Bharatanatyam dancer of all. And so this is more of a kind of fan who is looking at a great figure with certain differences. Here is a fan who doesn't actually know her medium well, and he himself said that he didn't pursue or try to study or understand the Bharatanatyam as such, as a dance form. Now, dance form is a peculiar thing, because though dance is something which invariably could come into cinema, but the way Shotrita's cinematic realism, the way it is configured, dancing, because it was not like mainstream cinema, dancing didn't actually figure in his art, though a dancer plays a very important role in John Shankar as such. But so Rai was looking at a person who excels in a medium which he doesn't understand fully, and he's starting to understand. And also because the film was rather short, Rai was trying to capture the person as much as he can, which you could see which was very much absent in other films. There was bits and parts of Vinod Bihari doing his work in that sense, but there also Rai is a bit reticent, rather going to personal. But here, most probably because she was not a mentor, she excels in a kind. She is a master of a form which is not close to him. Therefore, Rai actually kind of spends most of the time watching the person very closely. But of course, there is a certain economy behind it, and therefore certain persons are left out as such.
Talking about the documentary itself, we see Ray, what you are saying, like he lets her perform, so to say. And one of the shots is her performing in front of the sea, on the sea beach. would you care to explain why that is? Because the theme of the song, which is taking place on the dance form, the content-wise, it is not really the sea as such. It's not really a requirement, so to say, in a performance.
Here one has to most probably, it was an aesthetic choice most probably. Because Ray most probably was trying to find out a backdrop which has an inherent rhythm of its own, but which is rather simple in that sense. Because the sea and the sky, there's not much to look at it, but it has an inherent kind of rhythm, a kind of rhythm which will kind of act as a support to the performer, but not kind of determine the performance dance art work. And we saw also Vinod Bihari Inner Eye ending in a long montage of Vinod Bihari walking. Vinod Bihari was a visual artist who was blind, but here I think if you watch Bala closely, what we find is a kind of liberation of the camera, Ray's camera, watching another visual art, another art which is also visual, that's dance.
Yeah.
So Ray gives a considerable amount of time to capture this master dance.
Well, you are talking about how Ray was still trying to find his way to this art form, but still we see Bala Saraswati not speaking that much in front of the camera. Do you think that would have been better if she herself talked about her own art form, which we don't see in this documentary?
Which we don't actually. It might be because Ray, but because that to have involved Ray asking questions. It might be about Ray not being very conversant with what happened. So he was becoming reticent. It was more of it was trying more to be more like a silent observer as such. Most probably because therefore the conversation or Bala Saraswati speaking, that's something which is absent.
Yeah, the silent observer that Ray is. For the last 10 minutes of documentary, it is entirely about Bala Saraswati dancing, without any narration, without anything else. Now, would you say that this is more closer to the documentary format of letting the art form speak for itself? Or is it Ray moving away from the conventional format of explaining what is happening on the screen?
Both, in the sense that this is a peculiar moment, a marvelous moment, when what the camera is doing, it's documenting a dance. But if you think of it in its entirety, then someone is performing in front of the camera. That's what happens when one shoots a fiction film.
Yeah.
So in that sense, the moment of dancing, the non-fiction, the gap between the non-fiction and fiction actually blurs. It's someone performing to the camera, and the other's task is to record the entire performance. So I think that was the moment when Ray was most comfortable as such, because that moment actually blurs the difference between fiction and non-fiction.
True. Well, moving on to one of his most talked about documentaries in recent time, which was actually shot way back in 1971. It is Sikkim. I mean, we got to see it in after so long. Now it's there on the net and everything. But this was actually commissioned again as an advertisement of Sikkim by the royalty themselves. So, do you think this was another aspect of making the documentary that Ray had to keep in mind, the commercial viability of it?
No, it's not commercial. It's such a, I mean, this film actually landed up in controversy and it got banned or something. It was not something as such, which proves that the Ray didn't actually make the film the way it was meant to be. It was supposed to be a tourism film.
Right.
But within the film there were lots and lots of aspects coming in about the monarchy and so on and so forth, which the government was not comfortable about. And therefore, there was this idea of not releasing it as such. But as far we know that Ray was very fond of hills, fond of the terrains in the hills and those kind of landscape and so on and so forth. But Sikkim, in a sense, it's a film which shifts from being a film about the landscape and becomes more about the people and, and the social system, so on and so on. So it was a peculiar case where Ray was making a commercial film, and also in a very subtle way or something like that, it's deviating from what is being asked to.
Talking about the controversy as such, I mean, if you really want to look at it as to why such a fuss about the documentary, would you say this was one of his most subversive work, as in a conscious decision, or it was because of Ray's eye to detail, which everybody talks about?
It was Ray's eyes about detail, because I can recall Ray saying that the way he actually shot the royal family and so on and so forth, there were certain things which irked even in the royal family too. And if you look back to Andrew Robinson's biography, when he is talking about these moments, then you will see that what you were talking about, the details. He is fishing out details rather than there is something subversive in the entire design of the film. There was something disturbing to those people, to the people concerned, about how Ray was picking out certain aspects, certain images of certain aspects, which they didn't like to portray in this sense. So the devil is in the details.
Well, again we see here the performance during the festival, and again those were long shots of the performances, but here Ray himself says that it might not be possible for the outsider to understand what exactly those performances mean. Having said that, he's again silent about it, and he lets it play on. So do you think this is where this silence doesn't work for the documentary as such?
No, might not. That's the aesthetic, ethical, ideological stance of the artist at that time. Because I think Ray is actually becoming more informed. Because if we look back into other ethnographic filmmakers like Jean Rouch, the famous French filmmaker, Jean Rouch had a lot of troubles. Actually, Jean Rouch pitted himself against questions regarding how to shoot tribal rituals as such. That is, in other words, rituals of a completely alien culture. Would the filmmaker explain? Would the filmmaker intervene? If the filmmaker explains, would it be a kind of simplistic reduction of things, so on and so forth? So these are problems which filmmakers were actually very kind of aware of. So it was Ray's choice that even if it's opaque, one of the tasks a documentary filmmaker does is to archive. And to archive does not necessarily always mean to explain. It's to record certain things. So Ray kind of opted for silent recording of things and archiving of things.
But one always it's a wonder, because it was commissioned by the royalty themselves and he had his permission, there are very few shots of the insides of the palace, so to say, or the lives of the king and the queen. Why do you think that is?
He shot as far as I know, he shot the indoors, shot the royal family, but the way he shot was, the makers, they were not happy. So I think why Ray himself didn't pursue in his lifetime, he didn't much pursue a film as such, because Ray was not, most probably was not happy the way it ended up. Yeah. and it's a loss of ours that we have also lost the rushes. Then one would have, if we can recover the rushes, then we would have had certain inkling about what Ray shot and what he couldn't keep as such. Ray instead went through a very kind of personalized, formal kind of thing, because Ray himself was very proud of the initial 7 minutes of when there were no words of nature, so on and so forth. So when an artist is not being able to do what he was supposed to do, he takes another recourse on the video. So Ray took another recourse as such.
Coming to the other kind of general questions about this documentary. Over the years, it was a few films, then a documentary, and it went on like that. What sort of influences do you see on his documentary, on the feature films that he was shooting, or vice versa, on some of his techniques of documentary which he was bringing to the feature films?
I think Satyajit as a realist filmmaker, from his first film onwards, there were aspects which were non-fiction. Because if you remember, but there's an anecdote as such that there was this famous documentary filmmaker Robert Flaherty, and his wife, when he saw Pothe, she kind of misunderstood the film to be a documentary. So actually, even within his feature films, there were aspects of looking into landscapes, cityscapes, behaviors, speech patterns, faces of people. If you recall architecture, if you recall the initial shots of Opera Chikro, which is again repeated in color in Jaga Filuna. Even if you see Jaga Filuna, which is a kind of detective thriller, but within the detective thriller there were actually moments, longish moments, when the detective is pursuing someone, stalking someone, criminal, through the alleys and intricate architectures of Venice. You will understand that in those moments, the impulse is more non-fiction than fiction. The impulse was more about not actually seeing the character, but equally, if not more, equally looking at the inner place. So, I think the non-fictional tendencies, non-fictional strains, it were there in his films. Sonar Killa is as much a detective thriller, as much a film on Rajasthan, on the places.
Yeah. Talk about Jamshakar is most about that period itself, based on the story. But again, what is common to all this, it is very evident, is the music that he uses. And he spends so much time on making this music. So, what would you say about the music that was there in his documentaries, if we take that as?
That's something I can't actually exactly recall, but in Bala, music plays a very definite role, because it was film dance and therefore this music. If I am not very wrong, one needs to check, but most probably Inarai ends up in most probably Rag Ashabori being played by Nikhil Kumar, which was supposed to be, he said, very positive kind of rag. Most probably it was Ashabori. Tagore's songs featured many songs composed by Tagore, so on and so forth. As far as Sukumar Rai, as I can recall it, the entire thing was very oral. The soundscape was very important, the performances as such. So unlike his fictional films, where music would often act as devices to underline affects, to underline dramatic moments, the way music is used in film, here we see the use of music as something which is evocative, and the music as as a kind of support system to the entire film. Because in inner eye, that rag is not immediately associated. But when Ray was thinking of a long passage of montage of really painting as such, and he decides not to speak himself, then what needs to come in is a kind of soundtrack which will accompany this painting, and therefore it was more evocative in that sense, rather affective or dramatic.
If we look at all his documentaries, right, from Rabindranath even to Sukumar Rai, almost all of them were commissioned by state government, national government, by government of other country. So, do you think Ray kind of lacked motivation of sort to shoot a documentary on his own terms?
That's something I'm not very sure about. One has to go back, look into his interviews as such. What one can guess, one can hunch that there are actually very few filmmakers all over the world who can actually distribute distribute their attention equally to fictional and non-fictional films. Very few filmmakers, and often we see filmmakers who, if they excel in documentary, they go on making documentary, because documentary films, non-fiction films as such, they need a different aesthetic, they need a different kind of ideological framework, they need different ethical choices, so on and so forth, which might not match with that of a fictional film. So most probably yes, he was more motivated in making fiction films rather than non-fiction. And we see largely that his fictional films are almost always, with the exception might be of Sikkim. All the fictional films, they are about personalities related to art in that sense. So whenever he is making a fictional film, it's more about his artistic credo. It's more about his artistic legacy as such. That's where he was very interested through fiction.
Here we are coming to the last stages of the interview, and so it's kind of contextualizing Ray in his own time. So if you could really place him and his documentaries along with the kind of documentaries that were being made all over the world at that point of time, 60s, 70s, 80s, and what stands out in Ray's documentaries, if anything, as his traits?
I think, as we were talking about in your earlier question, actually, I think Ray paid less attention to documentaries. Had he been more attentive to his documentary, or had he been more willing to shoot more documentaries, we would have got few better films as such. Because there are other filmmakers. If we think of Janukuda, in whose film also you can't differentiate between fiction and non-fiction. But we think of Chris Marker, if we think of Alexander Astru, and there are many other filmmakers, Antonini, and then we will see that they had made a bit more non-fictions than Ray himself as such. Most probably, this was a kind of tendency which works within the Indian subcontinent, might be. But I don't think Ray's documentaries particularly stand out. They stand out in a sense in comparison to the inner world as such. But in case of Ray himself, if you study Ray, the documentaries becomes very important, because as I told that, with the exception of Sikkim, all his documentaries are about artists who he admired, artists who have left a lasting influence on him, or in case of Sukumar Rai, was his father or something like that. So to understand the artisthood as such, this films become very important. So to me, Ray's non-fictions are important, not in the non-fictional history of non-fictions of Bengal or India as such, because there are other documentary filmmakers who might be even more kind of powerful, whose engagement with reality is more incisive as such. But to me, these documentaries are important to understand Ray himself.
Coming to Inner Eye, which was released in 1972, we see Ray depicting the works of Vinod Bihari in great detail. There are shots after shots of him doing his work, engaged in his own work, so which was not there in the previous one, which was Rabindranath Tagore. So what do you think, is this a corrective move, a conscious move from Ray's part in this documentary?
Actually, the nature of the film was more personal, because the previous film, which was actually shot, produced on the occasion of the 100th anniversary of Rabindranath Tagore, so it had more kind of constraints, certain kind of form, or it was needed by the producer, and in that sense, Ray's film, this film on Vinod Bihari, it was more of a personal kind of film. And since Ray is making a film not only on his mentor, but he is also making a film on a visual artist, and therefore the details came from that the medium had Ray's own medium and Vinod Bihari's medium, it had certain kind of connection. But I think this question is important in the sense, because personally I feel that if there is any one film which can talk about a certain kind, which can be regarded as certain kind of summarization of aesthetics of Ray at that point of time, then it's Vinod Bihari. There's this film on Vinod Bihari, because through the depiction in detail of Vinod Bihari's artisthood, Ray actually is presenting his own idea of art also. Therefore, the details were necessary.
If you could talk about this aesthetic that Ray was trying to portray, what was this aesthetic according to you?
Mainly, if you go into the history, then you will see that Vinod Bihari Mukhopadhyay's work, this entire Uber, it's preceded in Shantiniketan by that of Nandalal Bose, and before that, before Shantiniketan was established, by the Bengal School of Art, mainly spearheaded by Anindya Tagore. And Bengal School of Art, it was focused upon, invested upon a certain kind of mythological imagination of imaginary past in that sense. There was a nation building project, the idea of the nation, the image of the nation, and they culled it mainly from literature and other arts like Ajanta Ellora, frescoes and so on and so forth. But with Nandalal Bose's second half, after he comes to Shantiniketan, and with Vinod Bihari radical so what starts is aesthetic which is secular in nature, and therefore this aesthetic was dependent upon a close observation of details of nature, and therefore this entire thing had a kind of irony, because here is an aesthetic which is based upon detailed observation of nature, but the artist who is doing it is gradually going blind. And therefore, Ray actually, I think here, Ray's own filmmaking and Vinod Bihari's artisthood, they had a kind of very close kind of connection.
Yeah, the obvious thing which you are also talking about is how the painter is losing his eyesight. It's a very obvious thing, and Ray keeps on coming back to it in that short documentary, which makes us wonder, was it a documentary of a visually challenged person who happens to be a painter, or is it that of a painter who is visually challenged? Where is the axis of this documentary?
I think it's the latter. I think it's the latter because what race traces, because Inner Eye is not a film on it's not a despondent film. It's not a film which laments that someone, a visual artist, has gone blind. The entire film has a very strong positive note upon it. The humor, the life force, everything is very positive. And what Ray was actually striking upon, that the blindness of the artist was not an impediment in case of Vinod or that, because throughout his entire life, as Ray himself describes it, that Vinod actually, his mind became a sort of archive, a repository of details, physical types, gestures, so on and so forth. And therefore, when he went blind, it was then the entire thing was in his mind, those details. And the blindness also, I think, the blindness also helps. It become a kind of advantage to the artist in a particular kind of way. Because if you watch the thing very carefully, then we will see that after Vinod Mukhopadhyay goes blind, he is more inclined towards strong line drawings, small sculptures of very small size which can be handled with his fingers, and a mosaic or collage form of art. Therefore, a kind of visual art which is more tactile, because that's a perception which the artist hasn't lost, and it has become more accentuated after his blindness.
Right. Yeah. We see a definite kind of connection with Ray and Vinod Bihari, obviously because they were teacher and student. That is the relationship that they share, which makes you wonder why we see so little of the artist in conversation with his student, because that could have really gave us another dimension of two great artists in conversation.
That's the intelligent question, because if you look at the structure of the entire film, and if you see that there was a related essay, Binodda, it was written in Bengali, and Ray published it in, most probably it is anthologized in Vishay Chalachitra. If you look at that essay, then that essay is structured in a certain kind of way, which is just in the counterpoint of the film. Because in that essay, you will see few lines by Ray himself, few questions made by Ray, and the entire essay consists of quotations by Mukhopadhyay, which is so missing in this film. I think most probably Ray actually what he tried to do, he tried to keep himself out of the film. So he was more, though the film is very personal, but he tried not to be very subjective. So whenever the conversation comes in, Ray himself would come. We see bits and parts of Vinod Bihari talking about his own art, but it's very minimal.
Exactly.
I think the only reason we can now speculate is Ray's stance of keeping himself out of the film.
One teacher to the other, that of his father, Shukumar Ray. That documentary was released in 1987, the later parts of his life. So, evidently we see the first thing which we notice is not the visual but the audio, is that the narration is by Soumitra Chatterjee, not by Satyajit himself. So, it is more of a clarification as to why is that? Why is Ray not doing it? Is it because, again, what you were talking about, not to get attached too much to this documentary?
I think so. I think because we can only speculate now. I think Ray himself could have easily, because as we know from the audio recordings that he had this very beautiful voice and pronunciation and so on and so forth. So Ray preferred Soumitra Chatterjee to do it. I think that's to avoid the personal. And because Ray himself, since his father died at a very young age, and he didn't have much memory regarding his father, Ray's engagement with his father throughout his life was severely artistic and aesthetic, as we see in his writings mainly, and in bits and parts of his films. I think here, because one, Ray was in his not in his, the best of his health. That was one reason, and I think that the documentary of on Shukumar Rai was something which was hurried a bit, because it should have been done much earlier. It comes like an afterthought. That when Ray is thinking, obviously because of his health, that his working career is shortened, much shorter. So immediately kind of he jumps into it, right up. And Ray himself was reticent about his father. He didn't talk much about his father, and therefore I think that was a conscious decision of keeping his voice away.
Yeah.
That we can speculate.
And also, this is his only documentary in Bengal.
Mm.
Not was that because of the production that the state government kind of sponsored this entire documentary?
Might be, and I don't think so, because again, this has another level of personal into it. And I think because there is this long sections from Lakunesh official and other places, Ray actually most probably tried to present an artist who is essentially Bengali, though international in nature, in spirit.
True. I mean, if we go through the documentary, we see a sizable portion, almost half of it, is actually an Upendra Kishore Rai Chaudhary. And when he's tracing his own family, his forefathers. So, what you're trying to say is detachment to it, a conscious effort. Is this that unconscious slippage which is happening in this document?
I don't think it's an unconscious slippage. I think that at the fag end of his career, he's trying to look back at his illustrious family as such. And because the way Ray himself is, had this documentary been made by someone else, one would have actually, the three figures would have been there, Upendra Kishore, Shukumar and Chaudhary, and the connection between the three. So Ray kept himself out of it, but he has this kind of connection, and most probably, and that becomes very interesting. Shukumar Rai is someone, because as we know Shukumar Rai, he is a very unique place in Bengali literature. But Ray, I think, very consciously connects it with that of his father, that is Upendra Kishore Rai Chaudhary. And most probably Ray is saying that Upendra Kishore Rai Chaudhary actually started a kind of lineage, a kind of thinking of children's literature, which Shukumar Rai carries over and also mutates and changes it in a certain kind of way. So this connection, you were rightly pointed out, is less of a kind of documentary on his father and more of a documentary on his forefathers.
Yeah. One thing which everybody talks about quite rightly in his films and his documentaries is hyper detail, which is so evident. And even in many documentaries, we see how well he contextualizes the figures. But in the case of Sukumar Ray, we only see the author's world. We never see the turbulent time that Shukumar existed, so to say, the 1910s or the 1920s. So to say, so many things were happening in Bengal as far as the history is concerned. So would you think, would you say that this is in any way connected to raise another ideology in his life, that art should speak for itself? And he didn't really believe in the radical protest or politics, even in his own time in 70s.
He actually, I would disagree to that fact, because I know that's the general opinion. I disagree that he kind of disengaged from protest, because I think right from Ornate till John Orno, he was passionately engaged with the contemporary in his own way. But if you think of John Orno, it's a very bitter kind of film. He again later, Ghore Baire is also a very unique kind of engagement. Monoshutru and so on and so forth. They were also in kind of engagement. But rather than engaging with the times as such, He was more contemplative on times. And because if you see his later films, so it starts from Gauri Baide and the last three films, you will see because of his health and other reasons mainly, but it gives a certain kind of form to his film. He goes more interior. So the last three films are more shot indoors, interiors, and this is because of certain logistical reason. But as you have rightly pointed out, Shukumar Rai, the documentary on Shukumar Rai, is actually, it begins this entire thing of interiorization of things. But I don't say that he is decontextualizing Shukumar Rai. But most probably he's again going more personal because he is making a film on his father. That is a figure whom he remembers most probably indoors, and also I think his failing health, because had this film been shot 20 years earlier, then Ray would have gone into much detailed research, which he most probably didn't have time enough, because as far as my memory of the film, the release of the film is concerned, because this film was made after Ray actually was in ill health. It was suddenly that one has to make a film, and this film must be on the father in that sense.
Right.
So it becomes a kind of, it creates a insulated world in that sense, closed within itself, a world which is not made out of the life of the man, but by the words of the man.